for that dude. We're in college.
All right, welcome everyone to the third episode of Our View from 3102. We got a little bit different of a crew this time, so I'll have everybody introduce themselves again. My name is Tyson.
My name is Don.
Joe.
Big Boy Tank.
Big boy, Richie boy.
And I'm your guest today, Esteban.
Perfect. So today we have an exciting episode, hopefully. Last week we alluded to the fact that we're going to be talking about space colonization. Going to talk about SpaceX. We'll hopefully talk about Mars, terraforming other planets, what other possible planets we can or should go to, and what some of the benefits are of expanding beyond our home planet. So I thought that maybe a good way to start off this conversation would be, how are we going to get into space? And so I might turn the time over to Don. We're going to try to talk about SpaceX, ideally, and some of the rockets that they're working on. So what do you have for us, Don?
Yeah, so basically, SpaceX is pretty
My
famous.
boy Elon?
Our boy Elon Musk. He's so his company,
The goat.
the goat. So his company has found ways to minimize the cost of space travel, which until recently has been one of the biggest barriers for space exploration. And they're doing that by implementing one of the world's first reusable rockets. And so basically what happens is that their ship will go up.
This is the Falcon 9, or this is the Falcon Heavy?
I think it's
Both.
actually both, because I think they started to implement this in like all of their
Yeah, I think the Falcon
rockets.
9 just has, correct me if I'm wrong, the Falcon 9 has one stage that goes up into orbit, and then that one stage comes down and lands again.
Right.
Whereas the Falcon Heavy, I believe, has 3 separate stages that launch together and then land independently of each other and are reusable,
yeah.
I think.
Um,
And the first time they launched it, I think a couple of them broke and fell in the ocean or something. But the Falcon 9 has seemed to be pretty reusable. I could be wrong.
oh yeah, the Falcon.
Pull that up, Jamie.
Yeah.
Just kidding. It's a Joe room. Pull that up for me.
The Falcon Heavy does have like has 2 sets of boosters on the side,
Yeah.
and
And so the boosters are reusable as well as the main thing, or is it just the boosters that are reusable? I'm not sure.
that's a good question. I am not.
I'll
entirely
fact check
sure
and you can continue on,
Right.
on our thing. Sorry to interrupt.
So basically, what happens is once the boosters have used up all of their fuel for the flight, they will descend back to Earth in a controlled motion, and they will literally land upright on a pad, basically.
Oh, no
Joe
shit.
is orgasmic at hearing about it.
It's kind of like incredible to see that, because
We watched it together the first
yeah.
time the Falcon Heavy went off. We
Like,
watched that together.
this year,
and
right?
We were literally ejaculating inside. But it was exciting. It was cool.
Because it was the first time that has happened, or the first time that occurred with a Falcon Heavy, like a rocket of that magnitude.
Yeah, that was just the Falcon Heavy's debut.
Okay.
They've been using the Falcon 9. I believe that the Falcon 9 can go into, where is, let's see. Low Earth orbit would be where a satellite would still crash. It has to descend in low Earth orbit because there's still enough atmosphere. But wherever the ISS is, International Space Station, I think the
Okay.
Falcon 9 can send payloads to the ISS. The Falcon Heavy, I'm still doing some research on. I'm trying to remember.
I think it's to the moon and not Mars. I think.
Yeah. And then remember, so the Falcon Heavy was the one where he had his Roadster on it, and they launched that into space. That was the payload.
Oh yeah.
And so it says Falcon Heavy was designed to carry humans into space beyond low Earth orbit. Let's see. So yeah, and then that's going to be replaced by the BFR,
The big fat rocket.
the big fucking rocket.
Yeah,
No, technically it's a big Falcon rocket, I think is what they're calling it for publicity, but we all know it.
Well,
Elon
Musk
really wants to
is
call
like.
it. It's like how they have the
The BFC, the big fucking can.
yeah, or even Tesla, the models of the Tesla are the S, the E, I guess it's the S, the 3, and the X, so it spells out sex. Elon just wanted to do that just for fun. It's kind of funny. So
So yeah, that is an incredible technological achievement, because to control a rocket like that, and I assume it's automatic the way it descends, and they probably use some sort of PID controller or lots of them to automatically control it, and that's incredibly
yeah.
difficult. So that's one way they've been able to reduce the cost.
Yeah,
of
and if
space
I could
exploration.
interject one
Sure.
thing. So Elon, when he explains it, I watched a press conference about it where he talks about it. He compares it to, imagine how expensive it would be to fly from LA to New York if every time you got to New York you had to parachute out of the plane and the plane itself would crash and explode.
Right.
Like the tickets would be millions of dollars to fly from LA to New York. So how is it that a ticket can cost several $100s or a couple $1,000s at most for a ticket like that? Well, it's because the only cost you're paying is the fuel. I mean, the plane lands safely, it gets there, and then they can just reuse the thing. But the reason why,
Pilots.
the reason why rockets have been so historically expensive is because we trash the whole thing once we use it once. So if you can use it over and over again, and it has, which they've done. I mean, the Falcon 9, they reused the booster, and they've reused them several times, and it's worked fine. So it's pretty amazing engineering, and it makes sense from a financial perspective.
For sure. I guess like the reason companies have been hesitant to use reusable rockets is because of all the tragedies that have occurred like in the past with
Apollo
NASA.
18.
Challenger was
Yeah,
the big
Challenger.
one. Yeah, I
Like-
think we might get more into it later. That's what's really stalled space progress. In my opinion, that was the big hurdle that.
Challenger
We're really scared.
was that the one with the teacher that
Yeah.
got on board?
Yeah,
Okay.
Christina McAuliffe, I think is her name. Krista McAuliffe, maybe
Okay.
I think it's Krista,
Yeah.
not Christina. So yeah, she was the first teacher in space, and it exploded, and it's really tragic to hear what happened. I mean, and they say that the people in the capsule were alive when it exploded, and they only died on impact in the ocean. So it was like they were alive long enough to be like, oh crap, we're all dead, and then they
Oh,
just
wow.
fell and just they hit the ocean and they all died.
Dang.
Crazy.
So that's one.
Yeah, but that
reason
scared
for-
us for decades
Mhm.
of we don't want to repeat that. We don't want to have a horrible PR thing because the bad thing about that was the PR too, where because a teacher was going into space, that all the school children all over the nation gather in
Watch
front of the
on
TV
TV.
to watch, and they watched the teacher explode after their teacher went on for 15 minutes and said, "All right, kids, the teacher's going to go into space, so watch her go. She's going to go to the International Space Station, and tomorrow we're going to get to watch her do experiments in zero gravity." And then you see the teacher blow up in a big fiery ball of flame. Like, yeah,
Yeah, that's scary.
that's horrible PR. So
Yeah. And then the other one that occurred, I think was like 04 or 01 with
that was no, it's Columbia.
Columbia.
Columbia and Challenger, the two.
Yeah.
But the space shuttle, don't even get me started. Stupid space shuttle screwing up.
Yeah.
We trashed Saturn V, the most beautiful rocket we ever had, potentially the most beautiful machine we've ever built. We scrapped it, and we can't even make it today because we were worried that the Soviets were going to get the plans. So we destroyed all the plans. So even if we wanted to make a Saturn V today, we wouldn't know how. We'd have to
Really?
rediscover how to make it.
They just trashed the plane.
As far as I know, that's what I've read, which is
Dang.
it's
Another
horrible.
conspiracy that we can open up next time.
But I
So-
think if we wanted to go to the moon, if we wanted to send humans to the moon, I don't think we have a rocket that's big enough to do it. Until we get the BFR, even the Falcon Heavy wouldn't be enough to take us to take a crew of passengers to the moon.
That's kind of crazy to
It's
like,
retrogressive.
think
It's-
about. Yeah,
yeah,
like
it's-
like the moon isn't even that far, I guess.
especially compared to Mars.
Yeah,
Right.
or compared to any other location.
Celestial body.
Yeah.
I mean, Mars is. I mean, the moon is our backyard. I mean,
Right.
in an astronomical sense.
And
so-
it takes a lot of energy and power to get there.
Did you do any research about there's the I forget what it's called but it's essentially a rocket equation that the equation says that the distance that the rocket is able to travel is basically trapped inside a logarithm. So even if you double the amount of fuel that a rocket has, it doesn't double how far it can go or how fast it can go to escape
really?
Earth. Yeah, so like they call it being trapped inside the logarithm is because if you double something in a logarithm, it doesn't.
Right. It's, it
Like
rises
you would
super
need-
slowly.
Yeah, you would need, by amazingly large factors in order to get further and further out or
Right.
to increase greater and greater speed. So that's why, I mean, you need a Saturn V to get to the moon, and the Saturn V is, what, several hundred feet tall, I would imagine. I mean, I think the Saturn V
several
is,
stories tall.
I can look it up, 77 stories tall, is that what you said?
Several stories.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact
I'm going to
number.
look it up, that'd be interesting.
But,
to know.
So, like, another reason why spaceflight has been very expensive is because what NASA did previously was that they would piece together a rocket, construct one from parts from other companies. And so they had to find a way to integrate these separate pieces into one huge conglomerate. And that can be very expensive, and that can be very time consuming, and it's like I can only imagine like how stressful that would be. But the SpaceX, what they're doing instead is building everything in house. Their software, their hardware, everything is built in house, and so that helps drive the cost down of building the rocket way down, and also it perhaps gives the engineers a better understanding of their own equipment. You know, if something goes wrong, they can just modify it right there because it's the thing that they designed themselves.
Yeah.
And so that has definitely made space flight a lot, at least into the atmosphere, into orbit,
Yeah.
a little bit more accessible. I was gonna say, let's see what else. Yeah, and so it's to the point that NASA now commissioned SpaceX
Yeah.
to ship cargo up to the ISS,
Yeah.
which is like
Which decades ago you
incredible.
would have thought that's preposterous.
Right,
Like,
like
why
a
wouldn't
private
NASA just-
company,
yeah.
like why, like
Yeah, so that's amazing. Just to go back for the quick fact check that we wanted to do about the Saturn V. Saturn V was 363 feet tall, 33 feet wide, had a mass of 6.5 million pounds, and cost $1.1 billion to launch each time.
dang.
That's incredible. But again,
For
think,
one
think of
thing-
the expense.
You're
Think
right.
of the expense to send 3 people to the moon, and one of them has to stay in orbit, and the 2 get to go down. You know.
Yeah.
So, crazy. It's expensive. You can see why, especially, you know, if with the budget that we have, it's easy to say, well, that's a little bit too much. But commercial, you know, the private companies are making it more and more affordable.
Mhm.
And one aspect of that hopefully will be somewhat of a game changer is space flight for tourism, which has gotten a little bit of buzz in the news. There have been, you know, high-profile actors. Brad Pitt, you know, these people have signed on.
Really?
Brad Pitt got on a short list. I think it's not for SpaceX though. I think this is Richard Branson's company, Virgin Galactic.
Yeah.
So that's low Earth orbit. That's parabolic flight. You get 6 minutes of zero gravity, and then you get to come back down. So like you're high enough where you could probably see some cool stuff, but it's not like. But then there's other people. Like other people have paid. I believe SpaceX has plans to do a tour around the moon, and you can be a tourist on that flight, and you could see the moon, and you could do a flyby. And there might be Mars flybys planned in the future where you could be a space tourist. So, as silly as it sounds, I mean, there's people who are willing to shell out a bunch of money. I mean, I think if I was super rich, might be kind of cool, you know. I mean, there's people who go to Everest, and people do things just to have a story to tell, right? I mean,
Right.
that's a lot of what we do. Is you have a cool experience, so you have a cool story to tell, and going around the moon, zipping by on the moon at 20,000 miles an hour,
So it sounds like just
pretty
like a
dope
company-
story. I mean,
It sounds just like a company's trying to do this, but like, why isn't like the whole world just getting all on this as a big project, like pulling all our resources together for this?
yeah, that's a good question. Maybe that can be our next thing: is why go to space? I mean,
What's the point?
yeah, I mean, some people will just say it's a huge waste of time, which I think you could come up with a lot of arguments to counter that. But I don't know who would like to volunteer maybe some thoughts. Why do you think we should go to space, or should we go to space? Maybe you're against it.
Well, there are limited resources on the Earth. Out in space, there's potentially unlimited resources.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest reason why.
Benefits in colonizing in Mars. I mean, we got ice up there.
Yeah, I mean it's possible, but I think in terms of why do we want to do, I think resources are a big part of it. I mean, we have scarcity on planet Earth right now. That's why poverty is the symptom of scarcity, and when not everybody has enough, then some people starve or don't have enough. So not to say if we go to Mars we're going to solve world hunger, but at the same time, if you have more space, just to they say that even though I found an interesting fact that even though Mars is it's like a third of the size of Earth.
Wait, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's a third. Mars is like a third of the size of the Earth, but it has an equal land mass compared to the Earth because
mountains or something?
No,
because the ocean.
because of the ocean.
Oh.
So the amount of livable
yeah.
land on Mars would be the amount of livable land on Earth. So in that sense, it's kind of like a second home. I mean, ideally, I think in the future we would want to have more water, but I think if we were to terraform it, we wouldn't have to have oceans.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was a lot of thoughts there. I interrupted
But
you.
Elon said we're not gonna run out of water though.
Well, I think another reason why space exploration is a necessity, I think you have to think of like a long-term, which is hard for humans because we think of long-term goals as a 5-year career goal, a 10-year career goal.
Yeah.
But when you think about space exploration, we're talking about a generational,
You're
long-term
not going to see the
goal.
fruits. You're
You have
planting
to start.
trees.
Yeah, you got to start. You gotta start sowing the seeds for your posterity.
Yeah.
And Mars is not the end goal, and a lot of people think that Mars is the standard of space exploration. And really how we should
Jumping
view
off
it
point.
is the beginning of space exploration.
Yeah.
And it should be a springboard into more innovation for future posterity.
Yeah.
And that's why I think there's such a push from the science community to get to Mars, is because it's a catalyst for innovation and for a brighter future for everyone.
Yeah. Has anyone in here played the game Civilization on the computer?
I think I've watched you play.
Yeah, you did watch me play. Yeah. So Civilization, I mean, the general idea is you start off with like one settler. It's like one person, and he can found a city wherever he decides to found it.
Mhm.
And then that city can make more settlers that can go and found more cities. And then each of the cities that you have can choose to like build troops or barracks, or they can build pyramids, or like, you know, and you get different points in different categories.
Mm.
But I view going to Mars as we're finally building a settler from our main city, and we're sending it out to do other things. So it just allows for exponential growth. I mean, you start off with one planet, then you get to two, and then each of those planets, ideally in the future, could act independently of each other, and, you know, maybe they both decide to do more space colonization, and then you have 4 planets that are inhabited, and then one, you know, it just, you know, it allows for exponential human growth that isn't possible with the current resources we have and the current cultures that we have, and
Right.
I don't know, it leads for a lot of cool things. I think one other thing that comes up a lot in popular culture, and I'd like to discuss this with you, is the Mars is a safeguard against catastrophic events here on Earth, whether those catastrophic events be nuclear war, whether it be an asteroid impact, some sort of global pandemic disease that kills off 90% of the population. If we have our settlers over there that are autonomous enough to live on their own, barring, you know, even if there's a catastrophic event on Earth, that can secure the future safety of our species.
Mm.
So I think that's also a very valid point, that it would suck if we truly are the only intelligent life forms in the universe. How bad would it be if we just all blew ourselves up and we never got off our home planet?
But what if the
Right.
people we send out to Mars end up fighting themselves? 'Cause,
That's
you know,
what
like you
happened in Biosphere 2. You want to talk about it?
Let's go.
Let's go,
Take
man.
a reading assignment.
Yeah. So, do you guys know what Biosphere 2 is? So, it's basically a project starting in the late 1990s. And so, the idea was to test if we can recreate mimic a Earth environment. And if we
So it's
live
like out in
in
the
there,
desert, it's like this big
yeah,
compound.
if we can
yeah.
live off just the limited space and resources. So,
Yeah.
but the point is that it did not, like, the Times said it's one of the worst 100 ideas in the world, because it's actually pretty bad, because there's 8 people went in first, and they split into 2 groups, and then also you got also the oxygen level went down over time, so the people living there, they always wake up at night because the lack of oxygen, so the researchers have to pump in 7 tons of liquid oxygen for them to live, and also the food and freaking just basic food and all the stuff in the what's it called, the
biosphere,
the biosphere too only can like sustain 80% of their needs, so they actually have to rob the food bank and then cook food for themselves. So maybe we have to think about that for like space
Yeah.
colonization, because
I mean, the idea was it had to be completely self-sustaining.
Yeah,
It had its own oxygen, it produced its own oxygen, it had its own
Yeah.
food, and like you weren't allowed to go outside, like it's completely
Was this like a
self-contained.
project?
It's a
It's
project
in
there.
Arizona, yeah.
So
you
the
can go
outsider
visit. So
has to like
it was
help.
meant to explore the possibility of space colonies. But the interesting part that Rich was saying is that we think that we're pretty stable, but that those stable relationships can also devolve. And
Yeah.
it broke into tribalism, and there were like 2 tribes of people.
They never talk to each other, but they were not aggressive though, but they just do their own thing.
kill each
you know?
other?
No, they don't kill each other.
And that's something you gotta account for when you're talking about space exploration, is what is our primal history, and we gotta factor that in, because as humans we're evolutionary engineered to associate. We have strong, genetic makeup, and the way we act is to quickly associate with others around us. It makes us feel secure. As far as survival goes, there's a plethora of reasons why we do it, but when you look at somebody, you automatically look at distinctions of their phenotypic makeup, and you
For
put
the
them
Tall
into
Gang.
right.
This post brought to you by Tall Gang.
You put them into a category in your head, and I think that's not something you can just ignore. I think it's going to 100% be a factor in spaces.
Yeah.
How do we
Especially as we face scarcity, like
Right.
that's when we freak out the most. I think is when we don't have a lot of what we need to survive.
There were two more. There were two more examples that I found really interesting. One was a Russian experiment where they wanted to test whether or not a crew of 5 would be able to make. So one of the big things about going to Mars is that it takes a long time to get there. I think
Like
even in the
8
best
months?
window, yeah, I think
6 months
it's
is about the lowest.
yeah, several months, and that's if we get it right at the right time, that it's at the closest flyby distance. And
Oh
we get there.
because it shifts. Okay.
Yeah, because I mean the planet's so like if you go at the wrong time, I have no idea how long you're talking, but years probably. But so the Russians wanted to test how would a crew of 5 fare over a 6-month period in a small contained space, because we've gone to the moon, right? But it takes 3 days to get to the moon, so it's not that big a deal. I mean, you're pissing in a bucket for 3 days. You're pissing in a tube for 3 days.
Yeah,
Like, it's not a big deal, but
Gucci.
like a
6
Mars
months?
thing.
That's being conservative, and that's a long time.
Yeah, so is what they did is they put 5 Russians in a boxcar
I mean,
and
they're
they just put them in a
Russians.
train and they just like ran them around. So like they were trying to simulate motion and some other things. So they like put them in this little boxcar and they're like, all right, live in there for 6 months. Here's all your food. And like they made it, but
Did
they
get
It was
paid or
close
something,
call.
or-
and they got paid $100,000 each to do this experiment.
Whoa.
It's kind of cool. I had never heard of this before. I think it's called
Wow.
the Russian 500. It's
Sign
like-
me up.
so anyways, it was an interesting experiment, but I don't think it was longer than a year, because it's called like the Russian 500 or 550 project, and that is referring to days. So it was like a year and a half. A year is what, 365 days. So yeah, it was like a year and a half. Anyways,
Not
it's a long
that
ass
good
time.
of a pay, but so.
Yeah, you're making 60K.
Maybe
You're
for a
rich in
college
Russia.
kid.
Hey.
Maybe they're just college kids. Take a year off school, gap year.
Anyways, so the first one was with 5 dudes. They made it. They seemed a little kind of deranged at the end. They weren't very mentally stable, but they were fine. No fights broke out. Nothing happened. They tried to do one. I don't remember if it was before that or after that, but it was with a more international crew. So there were some Russians, some Canadians, some other people, and it was also mixed
It was the
gender.
Canadians. It was the Canadians.
So it was mixed gender, and it was dudes and girls, and they had a New Year's Eve party, and one of the Russians forced a kiss on the Canadian chick, and she like freaked out, and it was basically like he was trying to rape her, and then they had to like scrap the whole project,
Oh,
and they
shit.
called it off early because
Freaking
of sexual
Russians.
harassment. So like that's interesting too. Like, who do we send to space? You know, if you send a mixed gender crew, I think that happens in The Martian too, right? The book where there's like these two people are into each other, but they're not sure if they can go into a relationship because it might cause like a rift in the dynamic.
Yeah.
So like it is interesting.
Oh, we have to alert HR about this.
Yeah. So I was reading a book that suggested that we just send a very stable middle-aged couple out into space, and they're the ones who colonize it for us. But I
Which
don't
would
know.
make sense because then they could populate it and everything.
Yeah, although it was saying middle-aged, so maybe she would have. Yeah, but then it would make sense to send a younger couple. You know, you wouldn't want, because this was a middle-aged. I can't remember the rationale they were saying behind the middle-aged couple. Maybe just more security or something.
Right.
Because I mean, ideally you want to populate Mars, but you also can't do a stable colony with just 2 people. I mean, you have to send more people eventually, because I don't know. This ain't.
That would be an interesting.
What if we send like
thing
3
to
couples?
consider?
Well, I don't.
Maybe, but even then, I think
Like a
what
large
is
group
but what is the
people.
inbreeding? Because I mean, you need a small enough inbreeding coefficient that it's not going to cause problems down the road. Because even with
Right.
3 couples, they're eventually going to have to intermarry, and then
We'll keep sending them. We'll be like, you know what, 3 couples.
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
that's
that's the thing about colonizing Mars. I
you
don't
would
think
have you
it's
could
one
keep.
trip.
That's
You'd-
true.
I
But
think
you also wouldn't want to.
You'd
want to
start out with as stable as you can get it, and then
Yeah.
supplement it as needed.
So do you think that's how we should approach space colonization? Is we just send families and say go ahead and start having kids? Because well, problem
Hey,
one is, can a fetus develop in lower gravity than Earth is used to? Nobody knows.
See, I
Is
think
gravity important for for
Oh.
embryonic development?
It definitely has a factor.
Probably.
I'd say.
And then I don't know. There's also interesting, little science fiction things about what if a kid is born on Mars and he's used to that low gravity, and then if he came back to Earth, he like couldn't stand the gravity on Earth. Like, he just, like, be crushed.
Superman, but reversed.
Kind of, yeah. Like instead of being used to freaking Krypton and you're like, awesome on Earth, it's the opposite. You're just like super weak. So I don't know. Or like the moon would probably be even worse than Mars in that regard. Like if you were born on the moon, that has like, it's not a third of the size of the Earth, it's a sixth of the size of the Earth, and it has a land mass. The area of the moon is equal to about the area of the United States. So it's pretty big, but it's not,
That'd be
not as
interesting.
big. So anyways,
I guess like
tangent.
to solve that problem, you have to find a way to create some kind of gravity or force, and like
Potentially.
right, and like
Or do we just, how would you test something like that? Like, I mean, do you just breed mice? I guess that's what you do. You just breed mice and see what happens.
Yeah.
but
Yeah, you
even then though,
Or,
like,
or
even
even on
then,
Mars.
there's no-
Or
Yeah.
chimps.
but even
Yeah.
then
Chimps
though,
are
like
humans.
experiments
That
run
probably wouldn't go
on animals don't necessarily translate 100% to humans.
That's true.
And that's also like kind of like a factor you
Well,
have to.
monkeys
That-
is the closest thing we have. I mean,
Yeah.
Right, but like still, even then, like, because for clinical trials they do things on animals and mice,
And then
and
they don't really stick to people.
it doesn't work
Yeah.
just send a monkey to the sun for no reason.
for humans and stuff. And so
But then that leads to an interesting ethical question. I don't want to interrupt you, but do people on Mars have to follow Earth laws? Like
that,
if
yeah, so let's see, that is interesting, because then when you talk about space exploration, if you're actually serious about accomplishing something like this, you have to consider like the technological challenges, but you also have to consider the politics.
Yeah.
You know, like what laws are they going to follow, as you mentioned, or
Russian laws.
is it just like a clean slate?
And who's
Can
there
they-
to enforce it?
Exactly. And
the
so
Mars police, man, the Martians.
Ten Commandments for God.
It's like,
Joshua kill.
like these are things.
Bring it back to the basics.
But yeah, if prostitution crops up on Mars, who's there to squash it? Do we care?
Or if one dude was just to take over everybody and just slaughter them all, he just wanted the place to himself, what would we be able to do about
Probably.
Space Force.
it? Yeah,
Star
Space
Wars,
Force.
man.
We're gonna have to
Star
create our
Wars.
own like space military, you know?
Yeah, I don't know what that's gonna be like.
I think it feeds back into the idea of what type of people would we want to send to Mars? Would we want to just send in a traditional, ordinary family? I think the better solution
and
would
like
be
scientists
Probably
first.
not.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's what I'm
because
saying
in
is-
order to like drive that thing, you have to know how to like astronauts undergo months of training.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I don't think
But then again, the
Well, you
Apollo
don't
program
finish
developed
the
where.
question.
Sorry.
You're good.
What's up?
But I don't think we can avoid conflicts though. We are freaking
We're
monsters.
humans.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
freaking developed like through the wars. Like
I wanna
the
kill
wars
3
never
people in
ended.
one.
Like
Yeah.
since the human species, and we can compare ourselves to chimpanzees. You know, we split like
Yeah, as much
67
as we
million
want.
years ago. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
like
much
we're
as
just
we want
evil in
peace.
nature. Like you can't avoid conflicts.
that's true. But I mean, again, the danger of conflict in space is that at least on planet Earth, if you have a conflict with someone, you can just move somewhere else. You know, like there's two warring tribes, and if they want peace, they just kind of move away from each other, and they say,
Or-
"This is mine, this is yours. We'll stay on each other's sides."
Or create more bombs.
But on Mars, that same possibility doesn't happen.
gonna
If you have
split.
one base, then what do you do?
Split
are the
into
different
couple
Then you
groups.
split into
Yeah.
two groups, like the biosphere
Or what if
did,
it was
Yeah.
a possibility?
of going off into,
Yeah.
and so that's
Feeding into.
Well, I feel like-
terraforming. Yeah.
I feel like at that point we'd have to be constantly sending like more groups like on the go, because like to prevent something from like the biosphere from like recreating itself all over again, just keep sending new groups of people for them to interact. Because I mean, living with
Then
some-
they eventually was like going to their
So,
own, like,
what
own
if we
group.
took a different
like to just keep it together. I mean,
What if we took a different kind of perspective on colonizing Mars, and instead of viewing it as a colonizing expedition, it's something that we preemptively make hospitable as
Yeah.
far as, kind of beaten down, conquering nature, conquering space type thing.
Yeah.
Instead of just sending out a Jamestown village out to the Mars, we create
Yeah.
a place that is more likely to succeed.
So do you think the best case is then you send scientists first, people who are trained and pre-selected, and said these are mentally stable people who work well in groups? Is
That's
that also
what they did in
the
biosphere.
and it didn't
The
work?
doctor and scientists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I think that's the best but then is it you send scientists out and they build the base and they slowly grow it so that then it's ready for a colony later? What is the urgency of this
Or-
project? Do we need to send people there now and get them populating? I mean, ideally, I'm down for, being more aggressive about it, but I understand that there's problems with that.
but I do think though, like even though they send people that are very intellectual, I feel like there's a drawback too. Like how many doctors or people that are very educated, are social?
That's true. They say that there's never been an artist in space or a poet, and it's like these creative types also, that it also could help spark the human imagination about what is space like. Like the best people who've gone to space are just like test pilots. Like that's most of them. There's a few scientists, a few geologists who went to the moon, but
And so I feel like that's the reason why, like, that's probably one of the reasons why, like, in my personal opinion on this is, like, I just feel like it's one of the reasons why, like, this biosphere kind of didn't work out. Because, I mean, even though there are people that are very smart, they know how to, like, engineer and manage things. Socially, sometimes I feel like doctors may not know how to, like, interact in certain situations.
But you don't know though. Like you can just.
all right.
Well,
Here's
it's an
he's saying
assumption.
it's a possible.
Yeah,
it's a
yeah, it's
possible-
possible.
it's an
but,
assumption.
yeah.
so here's another alternative I want to lay down on you guys. Big Brother in space. Space reality show.
Oh, dude.
That'd be an interesting show.
So we were talking about this.
I would
earlier.
watch that.
Yeah. So the
People
idea
act
is
really differently with a camera on them.
that's true, but the idea is that instead of trying to avoid this drama and conflict that comes with
Big
space
Brother.
colonization, we milk it for all its sweet money. And you make a TV show out of it. It's on 24 hours a day. You can watch what these astronauts are doing. You send a couple F-boys out in space. Get it on with all the chicks. That would be prime. People estimate that it could get the viewership of the Olympics, that it could make like hundreds of millions of dollars, that it could finance the trip, and it would be
Ooh.
interesting, and it could engage people
What does the
in the
person do when they
colonization
win,
of
though?
space. I don't know if it's a contest. It's just like
It's just a reality show.
yeah, it's just a reality show that you send people in space, and it's
like
on the
Jersey
next
Shore.
episode. Yeah, it's Jersey Shore, but in space.
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting idea. The drawbacks would be, I mean, yeah, you kind of want smart people to go into space to figure out what to do, but smart people aren't always entertaining, and so maybe if the drama and the conflict is inevitable, maybe you just milk it for some money and some ratings. So I don't know. It's an interesting idea.
I definitely think we have to have people who know what they're doing go and colonize Mars first, because, like, technologically, I don't know if you guys have researched this, so I'm asking, like, how would we make a base that has livable oxygen? How do we, like, I guess create
Get water.
soil that is conducive for growth of plants and stuff like that?
That's-
So I think the soil, yeah, there's a lot of things to get into there.
Yeah.
Sorry, were you gonna say something?
Well, I just feel like that's just something that's probably going to take, like, first of all, like, we're not even going to be able to, we have to create, like, a base first for that. Like, a whole base, like, lay out a whole foundation.
Right.
Of,
But the
like,
question is, does that base still have Martian soil? Like, I think that, like, soil, I'm pretty sure the Martian soil has perchlorates, which mean that most plants that we know would not be able to be viable on Mars because they have things that are poisonous to plants. I don't know if anybody can, I think that's in the Martian, like, they talk about
Okay.
perchlorates, and so that, it makes it so you can't really farm on Mars, at least not yet. I don't know, like in terms of energy on Mars, Mars's atmosphere is primarily composed of CO2, and there are machines that can convert CO2 into, I think it uses what, CO2 and water to make CH4, which would be methane. So I know that there's some sort of CO2 methane conversion that exists that could help you get fuel to burn to stay warm or whatever. Oxygen, I'm not sure how. Well, I don't know. It's possible that they have some sort of thing that from CO2 makes oxygen and makes methane. I can't remember the chemistry, but there have been some ideas put forward. But food, we'd certainly have to send off first because we'd have to figure out how farming could work with
Right.
Martian soil. There are a lot of questions to answer. So Tank did some research on that in terms of terraforming Mars, which is the idea of making Mars more Earth-like. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, Tank.
Pray do tell. Thank you.
Right. So a big problem that we've kind of discussed is the fact that we would have to create a base, and it's this isolated environment. It's pretty controlled. There's a lot of controls that would need to be accounted for at all times. And on the flip side, what you could do is make Mars more hospitable and a more Earth-like environment, and kind of let the inevitable complexities of human error take care of themselves on a planet like Earth, and just kind of let natural selection, let all these things kind of play out just like it did on Earth. One theory that was proposed was because Mars, I believe Mars is like considerably colder than the Earth is. It can't actually host any life on it, and it's mostly made of carbon dioxide. And most of the water mass,
Colder meaning like
temperature-wise,
Like is it constant or is it drop
It
when
drops, yeah.
Yeah, so I think at the equator, the hottest it can get is like 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
Mhm.
So like it's still relatively
Really?
cold, but like the average temperature I believe is like -60 on Mars. Like it's
Holy
like
crap.
Antarctica in the winter most of the
Yeah.
time. Like it's very cold.
And so even though the atmosphere is it's like 95% carbon dioxide, it's still there's not enough carbon deposits in the atmosphere
It's very
and
thin compared to
yeah.
Earth too. It's not as dense.
yeah, it's a thinner atmosphere. And so because it is a thinner atmosphere, we would need to, even though there's a lot of premises back within this statement, but even though it is a thinner atmosphere, and even though there is 95% carbon dioxide, we would need to increase the greenhouse gas effect on Mars to increase the temperature, which could then be a catalyst for life being able to function on its, let nature do its own thing. And so one theory that could be a possible solution is somewhat of a solar panel effect with mirrors, and you take and harness the sun's energy, and you focus in on
The poles.
specifically the south pole of Mars, which is a large mass of frozen water, and which most of
Wait, frozen water, like how they discovered actual
Yes.
water.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the poles have
So,
frozen water.
actually most of the water on Mars is frozen. That's why it took so long to discover, is because it's not how we would view water. It's these little
Crystallized
it's
solids.
crystallized within the earth, and there's deep old ancient volcanic tunnels that have cleared out. We're storing crystallized water because of the temperature on the planet being so cold.
Right.
So we
So-
basically have a big laser, essentially like melting that.
And because the atmosphere is thinner, the sun's power is exponentially more strong.
Yeah, but the idea is also that Ting was alluding to, is that we could get a runaway greenhouse effect, which means that at some point, so is what we do, there are three options.
Basically, the big problem that we have on Earth, we want to recreate that on Mars.
Basically, we want global warming on Mars, yeah.
Climate change doesn't exist,
Oh,
guys.
jeez.
Come on.
Okay. So
Climate's always been increasing.
So there's three solutions that have been proposed for warming up Mars to melt the polar ice caps. So you have one, we could capture an asteroid and shoot it at Mars, which is hella dope. So you somehow get an asteroid, you redirect it towards the poles, and you just have it
That
blow
sounds
up.
hella risky though.
Yeah, but
And
at
so
least there's
what-
nobody living on Mars, so
Not yet.
Not yet. So we'd have to do that before people are there.
How big of an asteroid though? Because couldn't we knock Mars off orbit? If
That's what
it's big
Sayaka was
enough?
asking. I don't know.
It would
we'd
have to be-
calculate it.
Pretty big.
Yeah.
That'd be a big boy.
Okay, so that's one. Two.
Wait,
would be-
but
That's
you
your
didn't
big brother,
explain what would
Yeah, so
be-
sorry. So the runaway greenhouse effect, which
No.
is what I was. Oh no, what did you want me to explain?
Okay, so you explained that we'd want to harness an asteroid directed into Mars, but what would be the effects of that? Like, what would be the process in which that would terraform Mars?
Well, yeah. So it would melt the ice caps. Just
Oh, okay.
an asteroid impact has
Oh.
thousands of times the power even of the largest nuclear bomb we've ever created.
So we
just
wanna-
the kinetics of the explosion, would just be far greater than even the SAR bomba, which is. The
Is it
largest.
something that we'd want to directly aim at the ice cap?
Yeah, that's the
Okay.
idea.
That sounds
And you'd eject
large.
water. The explosion would be hot enough that it would melt water ice and it would eject it into the atmosphere. So the whole purpose of this, before I talk about the other ideas, is that if we can get enough water vapor into Mars's atmosphere, we can warm up the climate, which will in turn melt more water, which will get more water into the atmosphere.
A
and we
runaway
can-
effect.
A runaway effect. So it becomes the self-sustaining. The temperature goes up, so it melts more ice, which creates a thicker atmosphere, which warms up the temperature, which melts more ice, and it just keeps going.
This also seems something that we could also do a little bit more research on, because you said it's really cold in Mars. By the time it evaporates, we can see how long it takes for it to freeze again.
Well, I think we know the temperatures, but I don't know. I see what
Because
you're
it's a different.
more
If it's,
experiment.
I'm not I don't. Is it? I'm pretty sure it's not just water. There must be some type, more than just water in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know all the
Different
chemical
chemicals.
composition, but
Yeah.
anyways, so we could shoot an asteroid at Mars if we could figure out how to do that. The other idea would be we have very large nuclear stockpiles, and we should probably get rid of those. So the people have suggested to nuke Mars, where we nuke the poles. Not a great idea, but kind of fun.
Radioactive
It's possible.
waste.
We're talking possible solutions here.
I mean, we're just putting things out on the table.
Yeah, leave everything
We wouldn't want to live on the poles anyways. They'd be too cold. So it'd just be basically like nuking Antarctica. I mean, nobody lives there. Nobody cares. So that's another possibility. Then the most feasible, but also potentially the most difficult, would be the solar panel that Tank was suggesting, or some sort of very large mirror that we direct the sun's rays directly at the poles, and then that could help us cause a runaway.
And an
greenhouse
important
effect.
factor of why that is, I think, a good solution is because the sun's energy is extremely efficient in Mars's atmosphere. There's no ozone layer on Mars like we have on Earth. There's nothing that filters out through the rays of sun.
Sorry.
And so it's one of the most efficient energy sources we know of is the sun. We might as well use that, and it's amplified by the lack of, I guess,
Atmosphere, magnetosphere,
planetary
ozone.
evolution that Mars doesn't have that the Earth does.
So that's another concept that maybe we could talk about, is the fact that Mars would be difficult to live on because of the cosmic radiation that it receives that would damage our DNA. So we were talking. There's some crazy ideas. When we go to Mars in a spaceship, one of the problems would be how much radiation are we receiving on the way over? And that's all, because like ideally you would have a big lead-lined capsule or something, but then it's hard to get a bunch of mass up into space. So we were talking, there's a crazy idea where you bring a bunch of stuff on board, a bunch of food to live, and then as you poop, your poop gets used to make a poop shield around the space. Scientists have come up with the poop shield, the radiation poop shield that would protect us from Mars radiation. So that's a crazy idea. They say that once we get to Mars, the most likely scenario is that we will live underground because the crust of Mars would shield us from some of the radiation that we would receive otherwise. We would go up on the surface for missions and stuff, but you'd sleep underground.
And what's cool about that is that they've discovered that Mars has a plethora of these volcanic tunnels, and so
might not
how
have
that
to
worked
dig.
is the volcanic matter back whenever this occurred, millions, billions, I don't know how many years ago, but the inner volume of the volcanic material was flowing at a faster rate than the outer volume of material, and so it kind of just the inner volume was so fast that it just kind of dug its canal through the crust of Mars below the surface, and once it dried out, there's now this big tunnel within Mars, and you could possibly live within that.
How did we discover that there were tunnels, and how deep are they underneath, like the crust?
I don't know how deep they are. How they discovered it, probably just through.
I'd imagine imaging,
Gee,
maybe
yeah, and
Curiosity
mapping.
went and figured something out too. I mean,
Yeah.
we have rovers, we have
Right.
robots.
Okay.
Mars is the only planet in the solar system completely inhabited by robots.
That we know about.
That we know about.
Right. We haven't explored those volcanic tunnels.
I've
That's
seen
true.
Transformers, man.
Maybe there's robots. Okay. Let's mention a couple other brief things about terraforming. So, what do we need to live as humans? We need water. We need oxygen. We need, warmth, shelter,
Sunlight,
Food.
sunlight, food. Yeah, I guess food was a big one that I
Yeah.
missed somehow in there. So,
minerals, calcium.
I don't know. There's some other things interesting about
Xbox.
Mars. So we've talked about how to make some. We've talked about how to get water. That's an important. We can start melting some water, get an atmosphere. The nice thing about having an atmosphere completely composed of CO2 is that that's what plants breathe in, and then they breathe out oxygen. So you could potentially get. And if there's water ice on the planet that we could melt a little bit, the plants could use the water and then use the CO2 to create oxygen. So we could have plant a bunch of plants on Mars, send a bunch of rovers just to scatter seeds everywhere once it's warm enough for those seeds to grow. Or maybe we could genetically engineer seeds so that they don't need a lot of water. They can survive extremely cold temperatures or whatever
Or
it
even
is.
survive in the soil.
Yeah, or survive the perchlorates in the soil, whatever we have to do. And then that'll help us create oxygen. And then the greenhouse effect, the runaway greenhouse effect, helps us create warmth, which we would also need to survive. Obviously, the plants can also help with the food problem. So there's already a lot of things. One thing that's really interesting about colonizing Mars is, again, with the radiation. You couldn't live on Mars for a very long amount of time without developing cancer with the current levels of radiation. Part of that is because that Mars lacks a magnetosphere. Earth, because it has a molten core, that core of metal makes a magnetosphere around Earth, which deflects a lot of the sun's cosmic energy.
Oh, yeah, I remember
Mars,
that.
as far as we know, I think there's some speculation that it might have a liquid core, but as far as we know, it does not have a magnetosphere. So all of those rays that come from the sun are not deflected off of the magnetosphere, but are absorbed by the planet, and then that's exacerbated by the fact that it doesn't have an atmosphere.
Make them all wear lead coats.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, again, the idea for terraforming Mars is that hopefully someday we could live on Mars without any protection,
Right.
right? I mean, at first, yeah, you're going to have suits and things to breathe and stuff like that. But there have been a few proposals. I don't know all the details about somehow you could make a magnetosphere that would deflect a lot of the energy. It would require a huge ass machine that would create some sort of magnetic field, but it's possible. So that's something else that's interesting. So
Right, like a huge transformer or something.
yeah, and a lot of we were also talking a little bit earlier about self-replicating robots. That would be ideal for Mars colonization. Some sort of 3D printer that could 3D print another 3D printer, and
Damn, that's so meta, dude.
and then it just literally makes a bunch of other printers that can then print robots that can then go and do build us houses, build bricks, get these materials. Another part of space colonization that we've also neglected, I know I'm bringing these things up quickly, is asteroid mining. Could be a huge commercial incentive for space flight. So they estimate that there are asteroids that weigh billions of pounds or billions of tons. Then that a large percentage of their mass is made of gold or platinum or diamonds or silver or whatever other rare earth minerals that we have here. And there's something crazy that we found asteroids that we project could be worth trillions of dollars in resources. And so
Yeah, there's some asteroids that I think I read something absurd was like there's an asteroid that they found that has enough value, precious metals in it to last like 100 years or something crazy.
So that can help with our scarcity of resources here on Earth, and that could be a big incentive for large companies like SpaceX to go out in space to develop these technologies so we can harness these asteroids, which also goes into shooting asteroids at Mars, which I think is a cool idea. Like if we learn about asteroids and how to maybe capture them or harness their resources or whatever, then maybe we could learn how to redirect them on another path.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also interesting.
I'm just trying to understand how we would mine an asteroid, because isn't it ridiculously hard to land on one? Like I think
Japan
I heard
just
that,
landed on one.
That we
Landed
did.
on one. Yeah.
Okay, but like typically they go super fast. And
Yeah, you'd probably need to like land on it, then have some modulators to slow it down a little bit, bring it back closer to the Earth's orbit.
And they've talked about doing that for Mars, like putting asteroids into Mars's orbit or into the Moon's orbit or into Earth's orbit, so that it's
that way it's like a controlled speed. It's going
Yeah.
at the rate of Earth's orbit.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe it would be, you wouldn't send like a manned probe, like you'd go out and you'd send some sort of robot that has thrusters or something that could reposition the asteroid, and then you bring it into the orbit of a planet that's more manageable, and then you send up something to the asteroid and you mine it, and you just
Send up the pickaxes.
you send up all those Minecraft, all the people who are playing Minecraft when they're 6 years old, and in their 30s.
They're training for something.
Yeah.
For something, the Space Force.
The Space
There we
Force,
go.
there we
Space Force members.
And so, if I may, so this is another argument for space exploration, is in the process of trying to invent these technologies, we are able to somehow repurpose these for improving life on Earth.
Yeah.
An example from NASA was GPS.
Yep.
Right. It is because of their drive to explore space and to, reach new heights that we have this technology. Because of that has revolutionized life here on Earth. And so I'm just excited for the new technologies that will arise from this push forward. I have a question though. How long do you guys think it'll take to make the atmosphere good enough for us to live there? Like, how long does that process take? Yeah, on Mars.
Probably.
Well, if you think about the greenhouse effect that we experienced on Earth, just from if you want to, there's different segments of time that you could probably section it out into. But I think the main kind of catalyst for the climate change on the Earth was probably the start of the Industrial Age. I think the rate at which we've seen change in that period of time is actually pretty crazy. I'm not sure if it would mimic that on Mars, but it would take a lot of time.
I've heard thousands of years
Yeah.
would be. So, I mean, for thousands of years, we'd have to live on Mars in spacesuits. But we could have colonies underground where we grow our own food, and it's still self-sustaining. But in order to walk around in the Martian environment with no suit, breathe its own oxygen, have our own food up there, have liquid water, would probably take thousands of years. But just because, and that's hard. As humans, like a lot of our knee-jerk reaction is, well, I'm not going to see the benefit of it, so why?
Why
do I
Want it
do
now,
it?
want it now.
Yeah.
But the important also,
It's just altruism as a
Yeah.
human. You just have to be willing to make sacrifices, and so. Okay, we're running out of time, but maybe quickly, I would like to discuss. We've spent a lot of time on Mars. I think we all also understand that moon bases are just as feasible. The moon's right in our backyard. That could be a place for us to go. The moon doesn't have an atmosphere at all, so it's lacking some things that,
Mars,
I don't know if we could really terraform the moon, but the moon is a good option for a space base of some kind. I asked Joe to do some research about other planets that might be of interest or moons in the solar system that we might want to colonize, and so I'm going to ask Joe to speak a little bit about that.
The only moons that besides it's the only other places that are potentially habitable are the moons Titan, Europa, and there's also another moon. I forgot the name of it. But in those they have like seas of frozen water and stuff like that.
On all of the ones that you just mentioned,
At
Titan and
least on
Europa?
one. At least on one, I know.
I think on,
Well, I think there's water on at least all of them or something
That's
like
cool.
that. But on at least one of them as well. I forgot which one it's on. There's a lot of ammonia and stuff like that. Stuff that's pretty harmful to us in there. So those would be kind of some bad things.
And those moons belong to which planet?
Jupiter.
Jupiter.
Titan is around Saturn.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
I think
and
Europa is in
Ganymede. Hold on.
I think the one that has ammonia is the one that's around Jupiter.
Okay. I did a little bit of research, not that much.
Thank you, Google.
Well, cool. All right. We've discussed a lot. Unfortunately, we are running a little bit out of time. Does anyone have any final thoughts? Anything we skipped? Anything we missed? I think it's a broad topic. So
Yeah.
so can't
Space
expect to solve space exploration in one podcast, but we did our best.
that's true.
We might have more podcasts, perhaps exploring other more detailed parts of it.
I think there's a lot of stuff to dive into on this particular topic. A lot of resources too. I think it's something science fiction writers have thought about for a long time. Unfortunately, a lot of it's still in the realm of science fiction, but hopefully within our lifetime we can see it as part of science fact.
Oh,
Ooh.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, you
So-
should join us next time for our
Wouldn't it just turn into
podcast.
fiction?
But next time we'll be talking about Star Wars. That's right, bitches. Lightsabers.
Just maybe as a last thing, quick raise of hands. Who would be interested in going to Mars here? Everyone's interested except for maybe Don.
Yeah, go to hell, Don.
No.
5 of us. I don't know. I think it'd be interesting. Maybe
I'll do it.
the end of
Let's
towards
go.
the end of your life, if you're still healthy, contribute something to humanity before you kick the bucket.
Like, screw it.
I could do some dirty work for people on Mars if they don't want to do it.
Shovel their poop.
Whatever.
That's the
I'm a team player.
Yeah.
Elon says he wants to die on Mars too.
Yeah.
So and-
Really?
The
Yeah,
first
Elon
group
has
is in 7 to 10 years, so that's pretty close.
Damn.
And as a lot of people were skeptical, and they said, "Well, who would want to go to Mars?" But I believe they
Yeah,
have
some-
There's
thousands
like, yeah.
of signups. Like there's
Really?
like SpaceX asked for volunteer. People have asked for volunteers.
7 billion people on the Earth. You're gonna
There's
got to
be some
somebody.
crazy.
Somebody.
Yeah, so
But then, like,
not all of them are fit for space travel.
there you go.
So I think they say that like maybe 1 in
Qualification.
1,000 would be a.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Michael
That's very
Scott.
true. But
And,
I guess like one last thing I would like to say is that it's gonna be a great day when we have the first group of people setting foot on Mars, and I think it's just a testament to the progress and the perseverance that we have as a peoples, and that's just something beautiful and something to, yes, just keep in mind. So space exploration is really an amazing thing. It piques my interest
I'll be the
immensely.
first baby.
You'll be in the first group? I can see that, Rich.
Yeah, dude, I'm be in the history book, dude. Richard? Ooh, from China.
Smiling in the side. Oh.
So praise be unto Elon Musk.
Praise be, praise be.
Praise be.
That's a lot of mini Richard on Mars.
Elon Musk, if you want to contribute to our little podcast by giving each and every one of us a Tesla, be greatly appreciated.
So, yeah.
All right, we'll figure out the topic for this next week, and we'll be sure to bring you something
about
interesting.
ethics next week.
Yeah, I think the tentative subject for next week's podcast is ethics, specifically the ethics of evil, what makes people do evil things.
We are evil in general.
So be an interesting,
save
be
it.
an interesting
Save
time.
it.
Save it.
Rich already bought Mein Kampf in preparation for
Careful. I brought the
You want to
Communist
be a
Manifesto.
little monster, but you could
All right.
oppress the monster.
Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Adios.